This table is for VIP guests. Please find somewhere else. I froze. It was my son's wedding, but my daughter-in-law said it as if I were a stranger. I looked around. Flowers. Crystal glass. Soft lights everywhere. Then I looked down at my old suit, and at table 1, the seat I had just taken. The irony was hard to miss. Just a few hours earlier, I had signed the check myself, paying for all of it. I took my wife's hand. We walked away in silence, not knowing that the night was about to expose everything. Before I go on, if you're listening to this story and something feels familiar, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Now, let me tell you what happened right after that. I didn't say anything after that. I just stood there for a few seconds, long enough to realize that people around us had heard. No one spoke up. Glasses were still raised. Smiles stayed in place, as if what had just happened was too small to matter in such a luxurious afternoon. I knew that feeling well. It's the feeling of being pushed out, not by force, but by collective silence. Eleanor stood beside me. She didn't ask questions. She didn't react. 40 years of marriage taught us how to understand each other without words. Her hand gently tightened around mine, barely noticeable, a quiet reminder that she was still there. But I could feel the hurt rising in her, slowly like water soaking into cloth. Table 1 was where the staff had led us in the first place. I didn't ask for it. I didn't refuse it. I simply assumed that was how things were meant to be. Then Tiffany walked over, with 2 bridesmaids, long dresses, fixed smiles. Her eyes looked straight at me, the way you look at a decoration placed in the wrong spot. She said those words cleanly, clearly. No explanation needed. I turned and looked for Brandon. My son was near the stage, adjusting his tie, talking to people I didn't recognize. I called his name, not loudly, just enough for him to hear. Brandon turned around. He looked at me for a second. Then his eyes slid quickly to Tiffany. I waited for something. Anything. A gentle word. Even hesitation. But there was nothing. "Dad," he said quietly in a rush, "it's crowded today. You and Mom will be more comfortable in the back." Comfortable, I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I understood the conversation was over. In that moment, I realized I was no longer the center of my son's world. And maybe I hadn't been for a very long time. We stood up. The chairs were pushed back neatly. No one stopped us. A young waiter led us past rows of white tablecloths, past the softly lit area for the cameras, then turned into a narrow path behind everything. The music grew distant. Laughter faded away. The new table had no number, just a plastic table with a simple cloth set near the technical area. There were cables, control boxes. A few people bent over checking equipment. No one noticed us. Eleanor pulled out my chair, then sat across from me. I looked at her. She smiled. That familiar smile. The one she always uses when she wants me not to worry. But I couldn't stop thinking. The thoughts came slowly, quietly, one after another. I thought about that morning when I signed the final check. $2.5 million. I signed without hesitation. I believed it was a father's duty. I believed it was how I closed the chapter of raising a child. I also thought about the beach house. I had kept it a secret, planning to give it as a gift after the wedding. Not to impress anyone, but to let Brandon know that no matter how far he went, there would always be a place to come home to. Sitting at that table, I wondered if he still needed that. Eleanor placed her hand over mine. "We're fine," she said softly. I nodded. I didn't want her to see the shift inside me. I didn't want this day to become an even heavier memory. Music from the stage drifted over. The host began talking about love, about the future, about promises. I listened, not because I believed every word, but because I wanted to understand where my son stood within them. Yet with every sentence I felt farther away. I looked around. No familiar faces, no eyes searching for us. In that moment I understood something simple. When people decide to remove you from the frame, they do it gently. No arguments, no explanations. They just move you to another corner and continue the party as if nothing happened. I sat there, hands resting on the table, back straight, silent. I didn't know that just minutes later, this very silence would be where everything began to crack. I stayed seated at that table for a long time. No one noticed us. The technicians spoke quietly among themselves, careful not to let their voices drift into the reception. Eleanor adjusted the shawl on her shoulders, then placed her hands back on her lap, as if reminding herself to stay calm. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow, steady. I thought maybe this was how the rest of the afternoon would go, sitting in a corner, watching everything pass by, leaving when night finally fell. Then I heard Brandon's voice, not from the stage, not through the main speakers. It came from right behind me, from a monitor speaker near the technical area. At first I thought it was a test recording, but the voice was too real, too close. I turned my head. A young technician frowned, his hand still on the control board. He didn't seem to notice anything unusual. "Turn that off," Tiffany said with a light laugh, sharp and clean. "I don't want to hear that speech again." I looked at Eleanor. She had heard it too. Her gaze froze. Not with curiosity, but with instinct. I didn't say anything. I simply sat up straighter, as if my body already knew I was about to hear something I was never meant to hear. "Relax," Brandon replied. "After today, it's all done. Everything will fall into place." I had never heard my son speak like that. No familiar impatience, no usual bragging. His voice was calm, like someone talking about a plan that had been prepared for a long time. Tiffany laughed louder. "I just hope it's soon. I can't stand pretending to be the good daughter-in-law anymore. They always look like they just walked out of some old house from another time." I placed my hand on the table. My fingers closed, then opened. Eleanor no longer looked at me. She stared at the floor, as if she didn't want to hear any more, but couldn't bring herself to leave. "Next week," Brandon said. "I've already talked to the facility. All the paperwork is done. Just a few more signatures." "The nursing home by the canyon?" Tiffany asked. "That place is really tucked away. I like it. No one goes there." There was a short silence. I could hear myself breathing. Slow. Very slow. I didn't think about the place. I thought about the way they spoke. Neat, controlled, without emotion, like they were arranging an old item they no longer needed. "What about the money?" Tiffany asked. "I don't want today to happen and then have problems later." Brandon laughed. "The money's handled. I've worked it out." Something cold ran down my spine. Not fear, but familiarity. I had heard that tone too many times before. The voice of people who believe everything is under control. "The trust fund," Brandon continued without lowering his voice. $4.2 million. I'll withdraw it slowly, break it up. No one will notice." I turned to Eleanor. She looked up at me. No questions, just a look. I nodded very slightly. I didn't know what I was confirming. Maybe just that we had both heard the same thing. "The crypto's mostly gone," Brandon said, his voice dipping a little. "But the McLaren was worth it. All my friends saw it. They're starting to look at me differently." "And the signatures?" Tiffany asked. "I don't want trouble." "Don't worry," Brandon said. "I've taken care of it. Just a few strokes. No one can tell. Only one branch. It's small." I closed my eyes for a few seconds. When I opened them, everything looked the same. The lights, the tablecloths, the cables twisted along the floor at our feet. But I knew something had broken. Not in this room, but in the way I saw my son. Eleanor placed her hand over mine. This time she held it tightly. I could feel her slight trembling. I didn't want her to hear any more. But the voices kept coming, uninvited. "After today," Tiffany said, "everything will be clean. No more pretending." I opened my eyes. I looked straight at the speaker. I wasn't angry in the way people usually imagine. No explosion. No urge to act immediately. I just felt clarity, clear and cold. I had paid for this afternoon. I had been pushed out of my own frame, and now in this technical corner the truth was revealing itself. Without me asking, without me searching, I leaned toward the technician. "Can you hear that?" I asked quietly. He looked at me confused. I think the mic wasn't turned off." "I want it kept on," I said. "Just leave it on." He hesitated for a second, then nodded. I sat back down. Eleanor looked at me, her eyes full of questions. I didn't explain. I only said, "Stay here with me." She nodded. We sat there, like two people waiting for a storm to pass. I didn't know how this would end, but I knew one thing. From this moment on, I would not leave in silence again. I didn't stand up right away after what I had just heard. I didn't look around for anyone else's reaction either. The reception went on, as if nothing had been exposed in this hidden corner. Eleanor sat beside me, back straight, hands neatly folded on her lap. She didn't ask anything more. Sometimes silence is the only way to keep yourself from breaking. The music shifted. The host stepped onto the stage, voice brighter, more excited. I assumed the important part of the ceremony was about to begin. Brandon and Tiffany were probably up front under the lights, where all eyes were on them. I didn't want to look anymore. I just sat there, feeling each second pass, as if waiting for a signal to stand. Then I heard something else. Not from the speakers. Not from the stage. A faint disturbance starting near the entrance. At first, just a few heads turning. Then short pockets of silence, one after another. I turned around. A motorcade had stopped in front of the estate. No display. No sirens. But the way people instinctively stepped aside told me this wasn't just late guests arriving. Men in dark suits stepped out first, scanning the area, then opened the door for the person behind them. Brandon and Tiffany almost ran forward. I saw them from a distance. Brandon adjusted his jacket, a smile appearing too fast, too stiff. Tiffany walked beside him, her hand lightly on her husband's arm, posture confident, as if this was the moment they had been waiting for all afternoon. I knew exactly what they were thinking. They believed this presence was for them, for appearances, for the status they were trying to build at any cost. The man entering the courtyard didn't look at them right away. He paused, exchanged a few quiet words with security, then looked straight ahead. I recognized him before he saw me. Governor Miller, a familiar face. Not from television, but from closed-door meetings, from conversations that never needed to be written down. He walked slowly. Very slowly. Brandon extended his hand, the smile ready. Tiffany tilted her head slightly, preparing for a handshake meant to be witnessed. But Governor Miller didn't stop. He walked past them, as if they weren't there. I heard a sharp breath. I couldn't tell whose. He kept moving, past the white-covered tables, through the lights and curious stares, straight toward the technical area, toward the plastic table where I was sitting. I stood up, more by instinct than intention. Eleanor stood with me. Nate Sterling, he said, voice low and clear. What are you doing sitting in this corner? I looked at him. I didn't smile. I didn't act surprised. Good to see you, Miller, I replied. Looks like I was seated in the wrong place. He glanced around, then at the table, then back at me. A faint crease formed between his brows. The entire board has been looking for you, he said. The Bay Project is waiting on a final decision. 500 million. They say no one's willing to sign without you. The space around us seemed to freeze. I could feel it, even without turning around. Eleanor lightly touched my hand. Just enough. I'll handle it later, I said. Today is my son's wedding. Governor Miller studied me for another second, then turned to Eleanor. Mrs. Sterling, he nodded. It's been a long time. She returned a polite smile. Nothing more, nothing less. Only then did I turn back. Brandon stood not far away. His face had changed completely. No smile, no confidence. Tiffany stood beside him, gripping her glass tightly, her eyes shifting, as if trying to piece together information that had just fallen apart. Whispers began around us. Not loud, but enough to form a wave. I heard my name for the first time that afternoon, not with disdain, but with late recognition. Who is he? Sterling Global Energy. Isn't that... I didn't need to hear the rest. I had sat in rooms where a single nod could open or close an entire path. I knew the feeling of watching people realize they had misjudged someone. Governor Miller turned to the crowd. My apologies for the interruption, he said, but I need to speak with Nate Sterling. Right now, no one objected. No one spoke. Brandon took a step forward, then stopped. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was something like fear in his eyes. Not fear of embarrassment, but fear of realizing the ground beneath him was no longer solid. I looked at my son. No anger, no accusation, just a look. In his eyes, I saw an unspoken question. Who are you, Dad? I didn't answer. I turned to Governor Miller. Give me a few minutes, I said. I need to take care of a family matter. He nodded. I'll wait. I stood there, under the lights, surrounded by stairs, in a reception I had been asked to leave at the center table. And for the first time that afternoon, I knew things were about to change. Not because I wanted to make a scene, but because, once the truth is exposed, there's no putting it back. I didn't rush onto the stage. I stood still for a few more seconds. long enough for the room to reset its breathing. The whispers faded. The music had stopped at some point. The lights were still on, but no longer dazzling. I could feel the shift clearly, like a door quietly closing, revealing a different space behind it. Colder, more honest, I walked forward one slow step at a time, not to draw attention, simply because I no longer had any reason to hurry. Eleanor stayed seated in the back. She looked at me, her expression strangely calm. I knew she understood what I was about to do, even though we hadn't exchanged a single word. On the stage, the microphone was still live. I picked it up, tested it once, then brought it closer. The sound came through steady. No tremor. I heard my own voice, older, deeper, but clear. "I'd like to say a few words," I began. No one interrupted. No one objected. Brandon stood below arms, hanging at his sides, face tight. Tiffany stood next to him, her eyes darting quickly, as if searching for an exit. "I didn't plan to speak today," I continued. I believed my role had ended when I signed the final documents for this wedding. I paused. Not long. Just long enough for people to remember that part. I looked down. Brandon avoided my eyes. Tiffany didn't. She looked straight at me, but her gaze had changed. The earlier contempt was gone. In its place was open defense. "However," I said, "there are some things that, if not said here, will never have another chance to be said." I tilted my head slightly. A man stepped onto the stage and stopped a short distance from me. My attorney. He didn't smile. He didn't greet anyone. In his hands was a thin stack of documents, neatly arranged. "I'll keep this brief," I went on, "because I don't want to prolong the discomfort for anyone." I looked directly at Brandon. Over the past 18 months, transactions were made without my knowledge. $4.2 million was withdrawn from the family trust. A wave of murmurs rose, then quickly pressed down. I didn't need to look to know. There were signatures placed on transfer documents, I continued, that I never signed. Brandon took a small step back, very small, but enough for me to see it. "My attorney has verified everything I said evenly. There is documentation. There is no misunderstanding. I didn't use harsh words. I didn't need to. Truth, when placed correctly, carries its own weight. I also need to clarify one more thing," I said. "The wedding gift I intended to give today will no longer be given." Tiffany let out a tiny sound, like a breath cut short. Brandon looked up at me. For the first time that afternoon, real panic showed in his eyes. "The beach house transfer has been canceled," I said. "And the car displayed outside," I paused, turning slightly toward the entrance, "was purchased using illegitimate funds. Recovery is already in progress." No one asked how I knew. No one dared. The silence grew thick, as if the room wanted me to continue, and feared it at the same time. I lowered the microphone slightly. "I'm not standing here to humiliate anyone," I said. "I'm standing here to close doors that should have been closed a long time ago." I made a small gesture. Security stepped forward. Not fast. Not rough. They stopped beside Brandon and Tiffany, keeping a respectful distance. "I think I said this reception has gone on long enough." Tiffany tried to speak, but no sound came out. Brandon turned toward me, his lips moving. I didn't listen. I didn't need to. I had heard enough. They were escorted out. No delay. No argument. The large doors of the estate opened, then closed behind them. The sound was soft, but I knew that for them it would echo for a long time. I remained on the stage for a few more seconds. No applause. No movement. I nodded to my attorney, then stepped down. When I returned to the plastic table from earlier, Eleanor was already standing, waiting for me. She took my hand. "It's over," she said softly. I nodded, but deep down I knew this wasn't an ending. It was simply the moment when everything returned to where it truly belonged. We left the estate as the sky softened into evening. No one walked us out. No one tried to stop us. That eased me more than I expected. Eleanor walked slowly beside me, her hand in mine, warm and familiar. Our old car was parked by the side entrance where the trees dimmed the lights. I opened the door for her, then took the driver's seat. When the engine started, that familiar sound pulled me back from the space that had just closed behind us. We didn't speak during the first stretch of the drive. I watched the road ahead, straight and quiet. Eleanor looked out the window. Some things once said where they needed to be said don't need repeating anywhere else. I thought about the faces in that estate, about how their expressions shifted in just a few minutes. I didn't blame them. Everyone has their own way of measuring people. I only regretted realizing my son's measure too late. The days that followed moved steadily. No noise, no urgent calls. My attorney handled everything in proper order. I signed papers, read them carefully, then signed again. I didn't feel relief right away. Emptiness came first. It felt like clearing out a familiar room, then standing in the middle of it, unsure what to put back. News spread in its own way. I didn't explain. I didn't appear. Brandon and Tiffany faded from gatherings they used to attend without fail. Invitations grew fewer. I didn't follow it. I didn't ask. Eleanor didn't mention them. Except once. "Will our son be all right?" she asked very softly. I didn't answer immediately. I thought about it for a long time. "He'll learn," I said at last. "If he's willing to learn." Eleanor nodded. She didn't argue. She understood that some lessons can't be handed over, and can't be shielded from. They have to be lived through sooner or later. I began working on an idea that had been forming for a while, though I hadn't named it yet. I called it the Sterling Fund. Not to leave a mark, not to ease my conscience. I wanted to build a place where values were stated clearly from the start. Responsibility, boundaries, gratitude. We focused on education, on life skills, professional ethics. No showmanship, no large signs. I didn't want to turn it into another stage. On the day we signed the founding papers, Eleanor and I sat in a small room overlooking the garden. She read every line carefully, then signed. When she looked up, I saw the calm in her eyes that I had been searching for months. "This feels right," she said. That was all. We moved back to the farm, where everything began. In the mornings I woke early and walked the land. No meetings, no packed schedule. I fixed the fence, tended the small garden Eleanor loved. In the evenings we ate simply. I listened as she told old stories, details I used to overlook, thinking I had plenty of time. One evening, just before sunset, Eleanor asked if I had any regrets. I looked toward the horizon where the sun met the edge of the land. "No," I said. "I only wish I'd set boundaries sooner." She was quiet, then smiled. It was the smile I had known from the beginning. No blame, no comfort, just presence. Every so often I received letters from young people in the fund's programs. They didn't know much about me. They wrote about what they were learning. I read each letter slowly. Some nights, I set them down and sat quietly for a long time. I thought maybe that was how things found balance again, without noise. I didn't try to reconnect what had been broken. I didn't slam every door shut either. I left them where they belonged. If one day Brandon wants to step through, he'll have to knock. And if that day comes, I'll listen. But I won't open the door out of fear of being alone. One night, Eleanor and I sat on the porch, the air cool. She rested her head on my shoulder. I listened to insects to wind, moving through the leaves. I thought about that afternoon at the estate, about the plastic table, about the sentence that pushed us out of the frame. I realized something. Some moments that feel like humiliation are actually necessary reminders. A tree cannot stand if it forgets its roots. And wealth without gratitude is just a layer of paint, easy to peel away. I gently squeezed Eleanor's hand. Our old car sat quietly beside the porch, covered in a thin layer of dust. I had no intention of replacing it. I don't need a center table to know where I stand. I only need to know who I'm walking with and why. The evening passed slowly, and for the first time in a very long while, I slept peacefully. Before I end, I want to say one small thing. If this story made you pause, if it reminded you of family, of boundaries, or of gratitude we sometimes forget, then please subscribe, like, and share this video. Not for me, but for those who might need a reminder like this. Thank you for staying until the end. The lesson I've learned is simple. Money can build a grand table, but only kindness and gratitude can keep a family standing. If you're still holding on to your roots, then it's not too late.